Welcome to the Stash Cast, where innovation meets real estate. Let's dive in.
Yuri, I am super excited to have you here. Thanks for joining me today.
Of course. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so we had a chance to speak a little bit before this for the folks at home that don't know who you are. Could you just give us a background of who you are and what you do?
The short version is I do a few different things, but my main role is a research scientist at Autodesk, the design and manufacturing company. My focus is on AI competitive intelligence. I also look at where the future of different technology is happening and help make recommendations about what we may or may not want to get involved in. I also help our research team take ideas to the market. And at the same time, I'm a founding partner at a small venture capital fund called Capital, and a senior research fellow at the Digital Economist, a think tank based in DC.
That is amazing.
I like to keep busy.
How do you juggle it all?
Some days better than others.
Is it time blocking? You just time block things and don't let things interfere?
That's part of it. The good news with all of this is nothing requires my full attention all the time. I focus my attention in wild swings where I'm 100% focused on one thing for a period of time, and then I forget about it and I do the next item. That seems to be working so far. There are times when all three roles require my attention, and that gets a little bit dicey. If I try to multitask, everything is just horrible. So I have to focus one after another to make anything work.
Yeah, I can imagine. I roll in a similar fashion. I've got some real estate deals that I'm lead on. I've got the podcast and I've got Needle that I'm working on also.
Yeah.
But when we first spoke, you didn't just say, yeah, I'm going to go study computer science or something. You took a very roundabout path. So maybe if you could share that, I think it's a fascinating story.
Sure. I actually have never studied computer science. My original goal was to be an engineer. I'm from Northern Indiana, and I had a very good public high school. They had a program where you could take, because I was already way ahead on credits, work part of the day, take classes the other part of the day. And I got a job at an automotive company. I helped design the first minivan taxi cabs that are now used all throughout the city. They had a prototype and partnered me with their lead fabricator. He said, you two go figure this out because we have a deal now for these. He cut apart the minivan and I drafted everything else and worked together, put it back together, and it was great.
Was it a Star
Dodge Caravan, yes. And then they went live in Detroit, Chicago, and in New York in the early 2000s. And so that's what I thought engineering was, which it's not. So I got into Purdue in Indiana and quickly realized that is not what I wanted to do. There's a lot more math involved in mechanical engineering and less design. And so I decided after a year, my dynamics class, we had a substitute teacher who was a NASA rocket scientist. He was giving this lecture. I went up to him and I said, listen, I'm struggling just with keeping up with everything else. Also, I don't feel like I really get along with this cohort or the material. I want to be more involved on the design side. This is very math and systems heavy. And he said, Yuri, that's a great thing to bring up right now. So if you're not happy, why are you here? And no one had ever asked me that before. And I decided to take his advice and I dropped out the next day, which my parents were not happy about. I tried to figure out what I wanted to do next for about 6 months, and I re-enrolled Indiana University in a variety of things. I was like, you're right. If engineering is not it, I need to figure something else out. So I took a whole bunch of different kinds of classes. I ended up enjoying theater design because it was a nice combination of everything that I had liked doing. I enjoyed writing and sketching.
That is on par with the project that you had first done.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because in theater, there are limited rules, but there really are no rules on things. So it was like, here's the parameters you've set out. Now go figure it out. I got heavily involved in theater. That was at Indiana University in their South Bend campus. I transferred to their Bloomington campus and was one of the few undergrads who wanted to be a designer, particularly costume designer. And so I got to work with their graduate students on dozens of projects. A lot of people assumed I was a grad student just because I was volunteering for everything. So it gave me a lot of hands-on experience in a larger program. In the summer, I worked at the Santa Fe Opera, which is a phenomenal place to watch opera. It's beautiful. And I got into Juilliard for a year. They have a specialized program where you still have to audition for it. They take individuals in different programs and teach you what it's like to be a professional in New York. I was in their design program. I worked with all of the Broadway costume designers they would bring in to do essentially college productions. I was there for a year, worked as an assistant in the opera, dance, and drama division, and then used that to get into my first graduate school experience at the Yale Drama School. So I worked on an independent film with Al Pacino that I actually got on Craigslist. Didn't know it was his film, but I replied to an ad on Craigslist to do Salome, and the production coordinator contacted me. She's like, "You helped design the opera, so this would be great. Also, just so you know, this is Al Pacino's project, and you have to sign some NDAs and things." During that time, it was great. I hung out with Al for a couple of days in New York. He never could really remember my name, but I dressed up like everybody in the Algonquin Hotel in historical costume. He wanted to chat with a couple of different historical figures and have an interaction with them. So it was a great experience. They paid me in cash, but I never would have guessed that would have come from Craigslist. After that, I worked on a few other movies and Broadway shows as an assistant. In 2010, everything stopped. Once producers cannot raise money from people in finance, which is the primary source of financing, it affects everything. Shops were closing down, productions were closing down. The people that I used to work for on Broadway shows, the ones who were getting all the jobs, they had no jobs. I also went through a divorce at that same time. So I packed up my 2 dogs and what little belongings I had left and moved back to Indiana at the age of 30 to live with my parents, which was a very humbling experience. I didn't like being from the Midwest growing up. I always felt like I stood out and I was different. Going to New York was a phenomenal experience for me to break out of what I thought the mold was and the experiences that people I grew up with had. And then to go back and just be presented with the fact bad things happen and you have to figure out what's next was really eye-opening for me and depressing. I didn't have a lot of financial stability anyway, but I had nothing. I owned a house with my ex-wife that I couldn't afford to pay anymore. And so that went to foreclosure. I had a lot of huge financial difficulties. I licked my wounds and got to work to figure out what's next. Part of that was, how do I rebuild myself? I would go to the library and bookstore. I would go to the business book section. I would read books every single day. I had 4 jobs at one point. And so I was selling advertising for a TV station, which I had to talk my way into. I was an adjunct professor teaching costume design. I also was a server at a local brewery in South Bend called Granite Brewery. Great part about that was I wasn't alone. There were lawyers who had lost their jobs. There was a PhD in biomechanics who was there, a couple of doctors. My manager at that time joked that she had the smartest wait staff ever, because we were all Ivy League students who were from the Midwest whose lives just crashed in 2010, 2011, and just came back and were like, I need a job. And then at night I would clean offices. So there was a doctor's office and I would clean at night to cover bills and figure everything out. Among all of that, I decided I needed to start something of my own, because if not, I would never get out of this cycle. And so I launched a bottled water company called Indigo H2O. The website is still up. The product is not for sale. Essentially, it is high alkaline mineral water. There's a lot of things that went right for me at that time. I had just read this book called The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss.
That time.
It gave me a framework of how do you test out an idea without spending a bunch of money? That's what was important to me, because I had no idea. I had only ever taken art classes. I had no idea how to go and launch something. And so it gave me a good framework. I tested a few different things. It also helped that I had met some friends of my parents who started the world's first and largest online furniture sales company. It was called FurnitureFind.com. They sold it off. It crashed during the dot-com bubble, but they were consulting and they were great. I met them at a dinner party and pitched them my idea. And they said, we're not going to invest in you, but we will help you through this process, which was honestly more.
Yeah.
The Stash Cast is brought to you by Needle. What if you could use data and analytics to predict real estate transactions? With Needle, you can. Check it out at needle.us to learn more.
It was tremendous because I had no idea how to create an online anything.
It's like me how to fish instead of just handing me fish.
I pre-sold everything. Before Kickstarter, I created my own version because legally, you're allowed to sell a product that doesn't exist. You've got 60 or 90 days to deliver it, or you have to refund people. I didn't know that. So that's what I did. I photoshopped a bottle and labels and everything else, and I made it look like this was a highly valuable water that was for sale. And within a couple of weeks, I got my first sale from somebody in New York and another and another. I launched the company in 2011 and built it up until 2015.
That's amazing.
Yeah. 2015. So in the process of doing all this, the water was eventually featured in the Oscars, the Emmys, the Golden Globes. It won 3 international awards for taste.
That too.
In 2015, it was named the best tasting water in the world. It was named one of the best brands in the world by some company. Feature of the Oscars. Everything had been going amazing for me. And within a week, I had both the best entrepreneurial week of my life, followed by the worst. And so February 2015, I was in the Oscars. I had won the award for best tasting water in the world. I have a trophy downstairs that showcases that.
Oscar? They gave you an Oscar for the water?
I wish, for the Oscar.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, it is. Throughout this whole time, I got very good at telling the story of Indigo H2O, which was intertwined with my story of what a failed designer would come back to Indiana and to start a bottled water company. I had so much press that the state of Indiana freaked out on me and thought that I was this large international company masquerading as a startup. Fortunately, the bottles I had already sold out. I was selling more water than I could keep up with because of the Oscar buzz. I had to hire an attorney, which is where the bit of cash I had left went. We fought them and we won. At the end, the representatives I worked with at the state said, "Oh, we're sorry. We didn't realize that you're actually a startup. And so you were doing everything you were supposed to be doing. But we can't unring this bell. So this is what's going to have to happen. If you want to stay in business, you need to build this multi-million-dollar facility, essentially the equivalent of a Coke plant, because that is the only frame of reference they had. And so if you want to be a bottled water company, you need to build a bottled water, like mega facility. And so I said, okay, I am not going to do that. That required me to raise like tens of millions of dollars just to build something. And I wasn't selling that much product. I was selling like a few hundred bottles. And granted, my bottles of water were selling for $10 a pop at Whole Foods in Chicago. You could buy them online for me, but it was expensive, bougie water. I decided to close the company. And at that same time, which is why I'm now in Boston, I was hired by Emerson College to build and create their Business of Creative Enterprises program. I moved to Boston that summer, closed everything up, kept the website up, packed up my things, moved to Boston, and started this university program, which was essentially the university program I wish existed when I was in school, because I wanted to take the best of each program. What I realized is that if you want to be an exceptional painter, you take classes from the painting professors. You don't take painting classes from another department, because the painting professors do this all the time. Same thing with everything else. I noticed some of my other theater practitioners had taken watered down versions of these classes. I was more proficient in some ways than others, just because I decided that I was taking it from these different programs. And so I did that at Emerson. If you're taking a business class, you're taking it from the marketing department or from the business professors. If you're taking an art class, you're taking it from the art classes, not the watered down version. And then I created a system of classes that stitched everything together for students to help them think through their own education so they could choose themselves. Because the world, even in, this was 2015, I already had been watching theater programs close. My theater career collapsed well ahead of most of theirs, But systematically, a lot of them were watching their careers collapse because there's less theater. The high paying jobs go to the people who are already established. There's a lot of hierarchy involved in all that.
Yeah.
So I didn't want students who are graduating to experience that same thing. So I was teaching them how to be a little bit different. And it was a fun year. So I built the curriculum, hired the professors. And then at the end of the year, a new dean came in and he teamed up with the chair of the department I was in, and they decided that I was no longer necessary.
Double secret probation.
Yes. I learned a very important lesson is that academia, very political. I'm not good at that political side, and I didn't think about that at that time. They had hired somebody who was an entrepreneur and a go-getter, and that's what I did. I was smashing things along the way. I did not launch a program properly, and I didn't have any guidance. It set me up for failure, but partially it was my own fault. I was just, how do I make the best program possible? And I was as disruptive as I could because that's what I thought I was hired to be, and that was not it. But I did create a cash cow for the college. 6 months later or so, a couple of my colleagues messaged me and said that both the dean and the chair said publicly that they wish they never would have gotten rid of me because they didn't realize how much work I had done. Like all of this, I got the program listed on multiple interviews, all kinds of things. I essentially was carrying everything on my back, but I didn't make it look like it was complicated. And they said, this is so complicated. We don't know how he did this. And we wish we wouldn't have just done it that way. They've never told me that to my face. You shouldn't have gotten rid of me.
Yeah.
So
well, I just want to say I'm super proud of you for all of those things.
Thank you.
When you were talking about your early career, went to New York, it just sounds like you're having so much fun.
Yeah, it was part of just trying to figure out where I felt like I belonged and where I was really leaning into. A lot of it was, okay, this item I was trying didn't work out. What can I do next? And what can I learn from that will help me propel me to the next level in another area, which is also why sometimes I do multiple things simultaneously, testing out one thing I like while doing something else. After Emerson, I started working in the Cambridge area because there's a lot of startups in Boston and Cambridge, which was great. I advised a couple of them. I was brought on by one startup to be their chief marketing officer. The startup, which is no longer around, was called Skelmet, which is short for skeleton helmet, because originally they wanted to 3D print helmets. Realized it was too complicated. They got into 3D printing sunglasses. And so we could 3D scan your face with your iPhone, and then from there, turn that into a 3D printed pair of sunglasses. I have a pair, and it's phenomenal. I love it. I wear it rowing. I've had it, like 8 years now. It doesn't fog. It doesn't bounce. When I joined the company, they had a prototype, and they were like, we need to launch this. I learned quickly how to set up a program on Indiegogo. I had a good email list built up through Facebook from my days in the running bottled water company. And so did all that. I had this huge email list of like 10,000 people. I thought we had nailed our target demographic, launched the campaign, and nobody bought anything. Day one, 0 sales. I started messaging some of the people who said they loved this product and would totally buy it. There was one big area that I had missed. And so we thought that this would appeal to people who were outdoorsy, motorcycle enthusiasts, people with large heads. So sunglasses are created for the average white male in the United States. If you don't fall into that oval shaped face, glasses are not made for you. The 2 founders I worked with were Chinese. Their head shapes were just fundamentally different from mine. And so they had problems finding sunglasses. So we thought other people whose head shape was more unique would love this. Turns out they don't want to spend $200 for a pair of sunglasses. They want to spend $20 for a pair of sunglasses, complain about it, throw away, and buy another pair. The one thing I had in my back pocket was that I am exceptional at PR and marketing. Along the way, I had our 2 founders featured in multiple articles, and that's where we really found our niche. I got them featured in the Boston Globe, in Discovery Channel, TechCrunch, BuzzFeed. And what really hit it off was an article in Triathlete. As it turns out, the key demographic are men over 45 who get into running triathlons, because a triathlon is one of the few types of athletic experiences where you can buy your way to a faster time. You can buy a better bike, a better helmet. You can buy better equipment that will go faster. And so once we hit that demographic, sales shot up. What we sold pre-sales of $1 million. During this whole time, the two co-founders decided they didn't like the idea of being a tech company. They wanted to be a brand. We were very close to a partnership with Reebok, and they were like, why should we partner with Reebok when we can compete with Reebok? And that's when everything went downhill. And that's when I decided I need to start looking for another job. Failed because we didn't have actual customers. We had pre-sales, but no customers. So those all failed. I got them into a couple of accelerators to help things along. They were featured in the Forbes 30 under 30 list, which is actually pretty easy to game your way into. At that time, I was like, they can't afford to pay anything. I'm out. And so that's what led me to my first corporate role, which is where I'm in right now at Autodesk. A person I had met at Emerson. She was a classically trained actress who then went back to business school for innovation, was working at a construction company. And she introduced me to my first boss there. I applied for a job I wasn't qualified for, but he liked my resume enough so that we had a phone call, and he said, you know what? You're not qualified for this, but there's another opening on my team that I haven't put out there yet. I think you could be good at that. And it just so happened that was the role I got. So that's how I got into Autodesk the first time in a corporate role, which is completely outside the system because I had tried other times to get a corporate job, and I don't check any boxes for any of the corporate HR people. Even nowadays, I'm a little dodgy with that. So it's like I had to go around the system to get in, but that's how I got in first. And was my initial start at what I'm doing now at the tech level for Autodesk.
I love it. I think your story is great. And it just shows that if you get knocked down, you just got to get back up and try something a little different. Just keep working, keep hustling, keep going for it.
Yes, exactly. That's one thing. And it's just how I'm wired. I am just intensely relentless, and I don't give up very easily with things. And I think sometimes that's to a fault. I have a tendency of taking on maybe one too many projects because I like the idea of trying out new things. I got very good at juggling multiple projects during my theater days because you had to. There's very few individuals who have the luxury of, I'm going to do one show for 9 months or a year, and that will pay me enough so that I'm fine. There are people who have that luxury, and I wish that could have been me, but that's never been me. So I always had to do multiple shows simultaneously and got very good at compartmentalizing all of that. When I was hired at Autodesk, it was part of their open innovation program. They have 3 sites in North America, one in Boston, one in San Francisco, and one in Toronto, which are essentially maker spaces on steroids. And the concept was, how do you see where the future of technology is going? You can guess, you can work things out through what's happening in different areas. Or what if we invited technology to come to us? And so we co-located startups, academic teams, corporate innovation arms to come work into these centers. And then at the same time, we would work with government agencies and VCs to create a framework called an innovation ecosystem. There's a Dr. Fiona Murray, actually named Dr. Fiona Murray from MIT, did a large study about this. And I was fortunate enough to study under her when I went to MIT a little bit later. But that's really what it is. And that's why Silicon Valley exists. That's why pockets in Boston exist and other parts of the country and the world. There's 5 elements that have to come together to really build up a startup ecosystem. We just happened to try to create it on our own. And so it worked pretty well. I was in charge of outreach. And initially it was just Boston. Then I took over Boston, San Francisco, and Toronto, connecting us to the local communities for startups, incubators, and accelerators. It's also why I started working with Mass Challenge and Yale and a few other places. And to this day, even though I'm no longer on that team, I still am a mentor and a judge at Yale Sci-City and Mass Challenge and a few other places.
5 elements that you have to have a successful startup ecosystem.
So the 5 elements are, so you need government agencies need to be involved. You need to have some kind of risk capital, usually VCs or corporate VCs. You need corporations, you need academic teams, and then you need the startups themselves. Mm-hmm. So if you start to really look at the areas that are popping, you'll see those 5 entities working together because that's where innovation thrives. And you need all of them. You need the corporations to buy the startups or to invest in the startups. You need the risk capital. You need government to actually help out. We can have a longer talk about what China's doing and what they're doing wrong, what they're doing right about building out their own areas, because they invested so much into their infrastructure and the startup ecosystem, which is why, even though they're silent until they're not, a lot of projects from China should give companies in the West pause, just because they're so good and they work in secret and then they just suddenly emerge. Each of those cities have been doing all of those. I worked with all of that, and then the pandemic hit and our physical places were closed down. So I started turning our program virtual, and I started working with countries instead, helping build out our presence in Singapore, Japan, and Germany. I learned a very important lesson about Japan and culture, and why culturally there are some instances where startups work better than others. The United States is unique in that failure is not seen as a huge stigma, particularly on the West Coast. When my first startup failed, people would joke that, great, now you've actually done that. Or the first time I got sued, they're like, great, congratulations. Now you got that out of the way. You're now more investable because you got sued and survived, or because you built a company that did really well and then failed. It's okay. The next one will be better. In Japan, you don't have that same cultural focus.
Right.
Failure is seen as a huge stigma. It may have changed since then, or it may be easier now. This was in 2020, but I couldn't find that many startups. I had difficulties working with incubators there because they didn't exist, because a lot of individuals didn't want to start companies because they didn't want to fail. I focused more on Singapore, which is great. Singapore has a great startup community. While that was happening, I decided I should either get a new role, find a new job, or do something else. Rut. I just so happened to have a conversation with somebody from Google Ventures. She recently quit and got into the Duke Executive MBA program, and she loved it. And she said, it is a great compliment to what I had been doing. This was during the pandemic, so Duke's program was all virtual. She was studying for her MBA in California, had a great network of individuals, and felt like that was her next move. I had never heard of executive MBA programs before, and I started Googling them. I found that MIT had one, and that the deadline was a month from when I had that conversation. And so I was like, what if I apply for this executive MBA program at MIT and get in? If I don't get in, then it doesn't matter. I'll find something else, but let's go for it. So I pitched it to my boss, and he said, yeah, if you get in, we'll talk. I had enough of a yes to go for it. For a month, I wrote essays over and over again, applied, I was waitlisted, and I got in on the very last day. Got in, which was great, and that was in August. Autodesk has a program where they help pay for education, so they helped pay for some of my education. And I was off in the races. It didn't matter to me that other people had gotten into the program faster than me. That's all that matters. For 2 years, I worked full time, and I was part of the executive MBA program at MIT, which means that you go to school on weekends. They expect you to have a full-time job because what they want you to do is take what you've learned to your work. And it's still intense. As they keep telling you every single day you're there, you're lucky to be here. Also, there are no free rides. We will fail you out of this program if you don't do the work. So show up, do the work, don't cheat, and you'll be fine. But if you start dragging, we'll kick you out. And there are some people who dropped out and all kinds of things. But it was an amazing and stressful 2 years of my life. I learned an immense amount about corporate innovation. AI was starting to pop up even more. Being at MIT studying AI is absolutely phenomenal. There are people who are so smart, it's intimidating to be around them because you just felt like a complete idiot the first time they say anything. I also was working on a couple of startups while I was there. One was a blockchain company. And then I watched blockchain crypto fall apart in 2022. So that kind of died. But it was a great experience that I brought back to Autodesk, which allowed me to do what I'm doing right now, which is a position that I created for myself. Post my MBA graduation, Autodesk decided to do a larger push into generative AI. I helped set up the team that reorganized everything else. That went so well that I got to work on a side project, which is what are our competitors doing when they use AI and how do we figure this out? And so I did that on the side and was able to figure out what our competitors were doing by looking at their job postings, reading their financial reports. And so you can figure out where they're putting money, how they're putting in money. And then when they list jobs, you're like, oh, they use very strong keywords. I know exactly who they're hiring for. So then you start putting those together and you go, okay, they've got this amount of money for this project and they're hiring this type of person. So we can now project, because corporations take a year or so after they start launching, bring in people to launch a project, about how far along they are. So that was how I got into my role. And because I work with our AI team, who are very smart researchers, I learn a ton just by being around them and being surrounded by them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll keep it rolling.
Okay. Great.
Get back up.
Hello. Come to the bug garage. Okay, I'm back.
All right. So you were saying that you can reverse engineer and figure out what your competitors are doing by looking at their financials and the keywords and the job postings they're putting up to determine what they're working on.
Yes. And that's something I didn't create. I think I read somewhere of somebody doing that. I don't know if corporations plan out this kind of thing, but it is a transparent way to see what a company is working on based on their job postings, especially if you start looking at them over a course of a couple of months. Meta has announced that it was going after AGI and was hiring very high profile individuals and giving them a ton of money. Other companies, if they don't, they should do a better job, particularly if they're trying to work in secret, because it is super easy to figure out what companies are doing.
That's exactly what we're doing with Needle, is looking at signs with regard to properties, commercial real, and determining which ones are most likely to sell.
It's like you start connecting some dots. I have long lists of databases that track things. You're looking at press releases. Now I look at what the CEO is doing. I love it when a new CEO comes in, because you can predict why they were hired by the board and what they're focused on. For example, if a CEO comes in and they are very good at marketing, there's going to be a huge marketing push around their products, or versus an engineer. And so you just reverse engineer what you know about the company, what they've done, and then the CEO, because that's how everything comes down from. And then you can start guessing what's going to happen next. And I'm not always right on this, but it's a good exercise of just trying to figure out. And again, I don't call it predicting the future, it's just educating, guessing of what's going to happen next. And so then myself and my team, we create slides that give a best estimated guess of what we think is going to happen. And sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong, but the information is valuable no matter what.
That's awesome. What are some of the best, I figured that out sort of moments? And then maybe on the flip side, what are some things that you thought were going to happen that you just missed it for whatever reason?
Yeah, I won't name any names, but one of our major competitors who was already building something in AI, they have a lot of money. But notice they were hiring a lot in healthcare. I was like, okay, great. Healthcare, not going to be what Autodesk is focused on. I didn't know if somebody was an expert in healthcare for AI, if their skills could be transferred to something else. The technical skills to build out one versus the other are not necessarily comparable. So I'm like, okay, great. So we're fine. And then one day, a couple of years ago, I started noticing they put up a job post for AI in design and AI around the factory. And I'm like, that's different, because that's not what they were hiring before. And then you see one, and you saw two or three. So we already know they've got money for this. They already have some kind of AI expertise, but now they're hiring for specifically the area that we were hoping they weren't. And so we caught that very early, and our teams to get a heads up. Granted, there's not a lot that we can do, but to know about it means that they're going to start putting out press releases. Parts we were wrong. I was trying to predict, and again, this is my own aggressive ambition of what if I could predict what a company is going to launch ahead of their conference or even ahead of our conference. Autodesk has their main lighting conference every single year. Last year, some of our competitors put out press releases, and it kind of took out our sales a little bit. And this happened last spring. I was like, what if I could predict something big that was going to happen? I saw some posts on LinkedIn about a new acquisition that a company was making. And I'm like, aha, this is going to be it. They're going to build up this thing over the summer and then launch it. And it's going to make huge news. And so I was right and I was wrong. That ended up happening in June. So they did it, like whatever I had read was just somebody's post about it. They announced that acquisition in June, and it was honestly a dud. It was not what I thought it'd be, of like this huge thing that be land on top of ours. My timing wasn't right. The amount of interest they got, not right. But I was right in the fact that they were buying somebody and trying to showcase it.
Poor execution on their side.
There's a lot of factors there, particularly now with our news cycle of what cuts through, what doesn't cut through. NVIDIA launching something maybe happened at the same time that just sucks all the oxygen out of everything. Even when I'm wrong, which is probably a lot of the times, I like going through this exercise of how can I think through how other companies are operating. Companies are run by humans, and humans react to things in not a logical way, but there's a human answer to everything. There are humans behind everything making decisions. If you can start thinking from their perspective, it does help strategy and guessing where they may go in a better way than just going, they're corporations. There's no logic. There's logic to everything that people do. It may not make sense to you or I, but there's logic. There are a lot of people behind the scenes, and I've watched this at the corporate level. There's a lot of people at a high level debating things for a long time, and there is a logical decision for them on how they got there.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned also the VC as well.
Yes, a small venture capital fund called Athenian Capital.
How did you start that, and what are you aiming to invest in?
That idea came about during the pandemic. I got fascinated by blockchain and cryptocurrency. I launched a podcast with a friend focused on explaining blockchain to the average person, because I honestly didn't know that much at all. A lot of the videos that were online were very technical. And so I was like, I need someone to explain this. He and I tried to launch a company. It failed because our code was stolen. But that led to a podcast. Podcast then led into a book that was published during the pandemic. I had met my co-founder, Jason, at Athenian during the pandemic on Zoom, like everybody else, but couldn't go anywhere about what we wanted to do. And I said, I just launched this book. I spend time chatting with startups. I'd love to get involved with startups, maybe blockchain startups, because I see there's a gaping hole there. My job has been to find startups in Boston and San Francisco, and oftentimes they're not invested in, but I introduce them to other companies. Autodesk doesn't invest in startups, but I was getting corporate entities and VCs. So I was like, this is great. He also is someone who had started many companies. He was running a consulting company at that time. And so we're like, yeah, we don't know what this means to start a VC fund, but we've got time. Let's look into it. And so we took our time and did some research. I had time in the pandemic. I was calling up VC friends, doing interviews, the legal side of it. What does it even mean? That took us a couple of years because we're working part-time to do all this. Then decided in 2022 to put a toe out there and created some pitch decks and everything else. We originally were going to be a Web3 VC fund and received a ton of great traction in 2022, leading up until FTX collapsed. Then it all dried up. So we decided to go back to the drawing board because I had institutional investors who didn't quite understand what Web3 was. They loved the experience I had, the contacts that both of us had. And they're like, we want to invest in you, but we don't quite know what we can do yet. So we went back to the drawing board and thought through what we were good at. A year ago, we met data scientist researcher. His name is Brian, and he developed a systematic way to help founders figure out what their problems are and give them a quantitative score. He previously had worked for Real Madrid and US Track and Field and was helping them scout talent at an early stage because it means a lot to those organizations. And then for some of his research, he decided to see if we can give a quantitative score to founders. So we started working with him and created this framework and launched Athenian Capital. It took us a little bit more to get everything up and running, but we officially launched earlier this year, focused on dual use startups. Those are startups who have built up some kind of a connection to the government, cybersecurity, drones, and have gotten some grants. We work with them to expand their footprint with the government, but also launch any kind of commercial products afterward.
Dual use. Got it. Makes
Yeah.
sense. Huh.
That's how that started. It's difficult, to be honest, to raise a venture capital fund without having a traditional finance background. Because if you, as my potential investor, I have access to a ton of startups, but I haven't been a professional money manager before. And so you are taking a risk to believe that I will spend your money wisely. And I believe that I will. There are a lot of examples of venture capitalists who acted in nefarious ways and took the money and bought cars. The legal ramifications are difficult. So there's a lot of trust involved. To be honest, as somebody who's raising a first fund, the most difficult part is convincing individuals to trust us enough to act on their behalf and find great companies to invest in. It's even harder with institutional investors. Often like to say that I'm considered an emerging manager. Everybody's definition of emerging manager is different between fund 1 to fund 4. They consider emerging, and then they have all their other parameters they put on there. It's very difficult to find people to invest in that. And so it's been an interesting learning experience to get us this far.
Akin to the startup founder's journey to go a startup fund founder, it sounds like the same set of challenges.
Yes, a lot of the challenges are almost identical. The bigger difference is we are selling ourselves and our access and our ability to find good deals and to give you a return. And so I'm not selling a product. So when they reject you, it's hard not to take that personally. They're rejecting me as a person. And they're like, I don't think that you fit what I'm looking for. I don't take it personally at all. But before, when I was raising money, if you take the excuse of you're too early for us, or we don't invest in first-time founders, or there's a lot of sideways excuses that we get, but that's what it comes down to. You are the best steward of their money. It's hard not to take that personally, but I've been told no a lot, so I'm good at brushing it off.
I'm seeing the parallels in real estate where a lot of people get started as an agent or a broker, interchangeable terms, really. And then they get into syndication or development. And I think it's that first deal that is probably the hardest. And then once you prove yourself, you have good systems and processes and deliver returns. Then, at least theoretically, I don't know, I haven't gotten that far yet, but a little bit easier.
It's good on them. They were around first, have shown great returns. So if somebody has an option of, I can try out this new individual who's not been tested, or I have access to giving money to Andreessen Horowitz, who I know has been around for 20 years. Let me just give it to them. Even my returns are lower. Historically, emerging managers return faster and higher because they have something to prove. But still, I get it. And you can see that. And that was one of my complaints during my design days. Why do so many shows keep hiring the same designers without giving out somebody new, even somebody new who's talented to try out? And it's oftentimes, before I left New York, I worked for a producer and I helped him set up the Broadway show once. And being on the other side of the person in charge of the money, it does change how you think through things. Even then I was like, great, I want to help out a new designer. I'm like, nope, we only have this amount of money, this amount of time. So we need to hire somebody that we know who can deliver on time, under budget, and be competent. Maybe a new designer could do that. Or there's this other designer who I know who's done it a dozen times and it's a no-brainer. Let's hire the established person, even though they're the ones who gets a lot of the jobs. But there's a reason for that.
It's de-risking the process.
Yeah.
And again, this is what we're doing with Needle, because the most common objections I would get as a broker out there hustling, and the harder I work, the luckier I get. But it would be, I like you, I like the hustle, etc. But so-and-so sold it to us. And if we're going to list it, we have to go back through one of the big three, so to speak.
Sure.
But if you bring us a deal off market, and so allowing the underdogs to get in front of opportunities before their competitors do.
Oh, that's very cool. There is something similar in a VC world called sidecar deals, A lot of individuals, if you are feeling difficulty raising a fund, it's one way to get your foot in the, you just find the deal and then you pull together a bunch of investors and then you made a separate sidecar deal with everybody. It means you're forfeiting your commission that you would get from it, but you get access to a deal and you can prove that you can pull together a deal, which then proves your ability to do this in a longer term. So that's another way that people do that, which sounds similar to what we're working on.
I feel like there's a lot of parallels between the two worlds that we're working in.
Definitely.
So I guess in your current role, what do you see with AI and innovation? Where's the world headed?
If I knew where the world is headed, I would be a billionaire right now.
Same.
Some I am noticing, particularly AI agents, are the cool thing right now. And a lot of new innovation or just new ways of interacting with software is coming about because of AI agents and MCP. AI agents aren't new. The concept was thought of by Apple in 1987. We've been working with agents collectively as the humans for a while, particularly with MCP, which is the ability for AI agents to have a common language with APIs. Amazing new things are happening, which should scare a lot of SaaS companies, because using an MCP server, you can essentially turn a SaaS product that has APIs into whatever UX you want. So I'll use Salesforce for an example. I have no connection or relation to Salesforce. They just popped to the top of my head. You can essentially take an MCP server and using Claude interface into your Salesforce interface and not have to deal with Salesforce ever again. You just set it up so that it pulls from Salesforce's APIs. I'm going to assume that Salesforce charges for their APIs, but you could use them as the generation engine. What gets scary is someone like Salesforce, which charges a per seat monthly subscription. You could have your MCP server running 24 hours a day. So let's say you used to have 100 seats, now you need just one. You hook it up to your MCP server and pull all the data from Salesforce, make them your engine. You don't have to use their interface. Set it up on your own, like Claude, to be like, I want to now text or type to get information from Salesforce. And you don't even have to deal with Salesforce anymore. A lot of SaaS companies, there's got to be at least one SaaS company who hasn't figured this out. I would predict that something big is going to happen to at least one of them by Q1 of next year, because more and more people are figuring this out. I'm not the first person to figure this out. I just saw it. I pay attention to what a lot of people are doing in research and watched this happen with a couple of other companies who have now fixed their problem. I think you're going to see more startups utilize MCP to take down some larger corporates because they could just move faster and they figured out a way to get around what they thought was a moat.
That is so interesting.
Yeah.
We'll go with the closer, the time travel question. You could go
sure.
forward.
Okay.
Where would you go and why?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would travel back to 1305 to watch Giotto finish up his fresco in the Arena Chapel in Italy. So this is my art history. So I was an art history minor. As a side note, a lot of the programs I have minors in at Indiana University, but I would try. So Giotto is credited with the start of the Renaissance. And so that was the first instance where somebody had stepped out of the Byzantine style, which was very prevalent, and then created something more human-centric and naturalistic. His fresco in that chapel were the first ones that depicted volume, emotions, depth, moving, and it wasn't just very static. I studied art history while I was an undergrad at Indiana University. I was in Florence in Italy for a few months. I got to visit this chapel until it's one thing to read about it, another thing to stand there and to look at it and to smell to be a fly on the wall at that time, to watch somebody step out of a form that was already established in the Byzantine style, that was very highly regarded, and then go, I want to try something different. What if I did this? And just to be around that kind of innovation is phenomenal. I would love to watch that moment in time. 1305. a bizarre time period, but that's when it happened. And that's what I would choose for a lot of different reasons.
That's great. I love it. Yuri, this has been a lot of fun. What's the best way to connect?
Sure. I'm very easy to find online. LinkedIn, Yuri Cataldo. My website is yuricataldo.com. We didn't get into this, but I actually have a digital AI digital twin of myself, which
Let's talk about it.
Yeah. That's something new that as a startup I was working with who has developed some of these. And so I've been testing it out. But you can find it on my website. If you go to yuricataldo.com, I programmed it with a lot of interviews I have done or writing that I have done. I got particularly interested in the idea of a digital twin a few months ago because I've been trying to do more writing. And I like the idea of having somebody be able to interact with me to hear more about why I was writing an article or a focus. So specifically, while I was at MIT, I was working on a startup idea that was going to be a blockchain solution for fashion supply chains. The fashion industry, even to this day, has a huge problem in that they can't track a garment independently from the sheep all the way to the customer. If you ask any company, they can't tell you how much water was used, how were the sheep treated, how were the workers treated, were they paid fairly? The fashion industry has multiple steps. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I was like, great, blockchain can solve this. Blockchain and AI, it's more of a how, not a what. You can't just say, here's an AI solution to this, or here's a blockchain solution to this without getting all the in-betweens. The problem with blockchain and even AI too is bad data in is bad everything else. Yeah. You can't verify all of along the way of a garment that everybody is going to not act in a nefarious way and put in bad data. And so I worked on that startup for a little bit and I couldn't solve it. And so we put it away. Now that I'm part of a think tank, I was like, let me approach this from more of a think tank perspective. And so I developed a framework based off of how Bitcoin has been set up. Bitcoin is set up because nobody trusts each other, but they have to interact with each other. So if there are three elements, there's the Bitcoin miners, there's the Bitcoin developers, and then the public. The three don't know each other, they don't trust each other, but they still work together because there are ways that the system has been set up. Because one helps run the system, one develops the system and verifies everything, and then there's the transactions that happen. I developed a framework for that. I've done multiple drafts of this document because I want to think through how to do this. If you want to hear more of the high level, like why this is important, because the fashion industry has done a horrible job of paying people historically. Like from colonialism till now, the average worker who works in fashion and makes your clothes doesn't make a living wage. Why is that? And what are some of the systemic things built up? Obviously, I can't put all of those into the paper, or it would be like a 200-page book versus a 10-page paper. The paper, I'm still going through the publishing process. It's going to have a QR code on there. As the reader, you can QR code that and then have a conversation with me about what I was thinking and all kinds of stuff. But that's what I'm testing out. There's also a lot more details. I own the rights to my blockchain book, which is called Be Left Behind. It's a very good basic book about what blockchain is. Even though it was written in 2020, it is very evergreen content. The book is great. Also, you don't have to go to the book. You just go to my Yuri AI and it's been uploaded. So all of the answers to your questions will be there. There's a lot of versions of writing that I've done or interviews that I've done that I've uploaded to Yuri AI, which is easy to find if you go to my website.
I'm going to check it out. This is great. I really appreciate you taking some time to have a conversation with me today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
That's it for the Stashcast. Subscribe, share, and stay ahead in commercial real estate and prop tech. See you next time.